as we mentioned earlier, doing stories and stuff. Maybe there's a trapper that lived here and he went down to the river one day to check his beaver trap and maybe he fell in.
Maybe there's a trapper that lived here and he went down to the river one day to check his beaver trap and maybe he fell in.
Who knows? Now we could do a cabinectomy. In other words, just cut it off. Get it the way we want it. Better have a door in our cabin. It's easier to get in and out if you got a door. It's hard climbing through the window sometime.
It's hard climbing through the window sometime.
There we go.
Welcome, and all American Cartel members, Anons, Facebook friends, Twitter followers, random YouTube viewer, BitChute viewer, TikToker, Redditor, GLPer, 4chaner, Rumbler, and anybody else that might be watching. Thanks for joining me. My name is Julio. I am the Theorizing Theorist. And today we're going to cover Bob Ross being a serial killer, and we're going to start with his Wikipedia. Now, I got some very compelling evidence, and I have names of victims for y'all, but we'll get there in due time. Now, this part may seem a little bit tedious or boring to some of y'all, but it's very important you know some certain facts about Robert Norman Ross. Was an American painter, art instructor, and television host. He was a creator and host of The Joy of Painting, which is, well, anyway, let me just read this through. It's a long video here. An instructional television program that aired from 1983 to 1994 on PBS in the United States, CBC in Canada, and similar channels in Latin America, Europe, and elsewhere. Ross would subsequently become widely known through his posthumous internet presence. Now, I'm curious as to how many of y'all knew that he was in the military. He was actually in it for 20 years, from 1961 to 1981. Now, 1981 is a very important date. Please remember it. He even got to the rank of Master Sergeant. So 1981, write it down in your notes if you need to. Early life. Ross was born in Daytona Beach, Florida to Jack and Ollie Ross, a carpenter and waitress respectively, and raised in Orlando, Florida. As an adolescent, Ross cared for injured animals, including armadillos, snakes, alligators, and squirrels, one of which was later featured in several episodes of his television show. He had a half-brother, Jim, who he mentioned in passing on his show. Ross dropped out of high school in the 9th grade while working as a carpenter with his father. He lost part of his left index finger, which did not affect his ability to later hold a palette while painting. In 1961, 18-year-old Ross enlisted in the United States Air Force and was put into service as a medical records technician. He rose to the rank of Master Sergeant and served as the first sergeant of the clinic at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. That's very important, where he first saw the snow and mountains that later appear as recurring themes in his paintings. He is very important. That's very important as well, guys. He developed his quick painting technique during brief daily work breaks, having held military positions that required him to act tough and mean. The guy who makes you scrub the latrine, the guy who makes you make your bed, the guy who screams at you for being late to work. Ross decided he would not raise his voice when he left the military. Now let's jump ahead a little bit. The landscapes he painted, typically mountains, lakes, snows, and log cabin scenes, were inspired by his years in Alaska, where he was stationed for the majority of his Air Force career. He repeatedly said everyone has inherent artistic talent and could become an accomplished artist given time, practice, and encouragement. Ross would say, "We don't make mistakes, we just have happy accidents." In 2014, the blog 538, this is important too, analyzed 381 episodes in which Ross painted live, concluding that 91% of Ross's painting contained at least one tree, 44 contained clouds, 39 mountains, 34 mountain lakes, and by his own estimation, Ross completed more than 30,000 paintings, 3 of each one basically. His work rarely contained human subjects or signs of human life. I think once it did, and then on rare occasions he would incorporate a cabin, sometimes with a chimney but without smoke and possibly unoccupied. So I think the cabin is the signal that they have, that he's using to kind of mark which paintings has a body attached to it, if that makes any sense. So go and check to see if you can find any paintings, and maybe shoot me a link to where you found it and I can check it out. Maybe I can link it to another murder. But anyway, together with husband, now check this out, this is how he's affiliated with the CIA. Together with husband Walt A retired CIA operative, Kowalski decided to make Ross the face of a new hobby craft business, a cottage industry of sorts, in the late 1970s and early 80s. So he's affiliated with the CIA, and I want you guys to know that the Bob Ross show, for whatever reasons, it's a phenomenon, if you will, that while it was airing, they had measured the amounts of crimes that would happen. And I want you to see here that he was a traveling salesman, as you can see there under the August 27, 2021. Very important as well. But yeah, the Bob Ross show would increase the amount of violence that would happen out in the public during its time of airing. So whatever that means. Now let's get to the bodies. Porcupine River. Now I want you to see the location of the mouth of Porcupine River. It's right on top of damn near of this Air Force base. Now what's so specific or significant about this Porcupine River? Well, the painting with the cabin kind of looks like it. I'm not trying to sit here and say, I'm sure at any angle you can make anything fit, but a man vanished on Alaska trapping expedition 46 years ago. His skull was just ID'd. Now, it wasn't just any trapping expedition. It was a beaver trapping expedition. And if you recall what he said in the beginning, right? And if you could only imagine my surprise or lack thereof when I discovered that they found only his skull next to a river. So anyway, snow-covered hills in the Porcupine. Oh, let's read this. His family members remember Gary Frank Southerner as a free spirit who spent time in Canada and worked on the Alaska oil pipeline. When he set out on the trip of a lifetime to go trapping in the Alaskan wilderness in fall of 1976, his family understood Sister Ann Bunyan told KTUU. Now, but the 25-year-old from New York vanished sometime over the winter. His family never heard from him again. Now, lots of weird discrepancies going on here in this story. They say a bear got to him because they found markings on his skull, and they even went to say that there were puncture markings that were perfectly, distanced and show that it was a bear. And then you hear other articles, and you're going to read in this article even, it says that his head was just scratched. Whatever that means. I guess you could scratch somebody with your teeth. Now, 46 years later, DNA testing on a skull found by a hunter in 1997 has identified Southerner's remains. Now, I want you to know that what's his name died in 95. So less than a year and a half later or 2 years later, they found the body of this guy. His family always suspected that was the case. Bunyan told KTUU they couldn't imagine Southerner, who'd now be 71, would leave them wondering all these years. Confirmation, though, has brought acceptance. That's the life he chose, Bunyan told the station. And not that he chose his death, but he chose a life where that was a possibility. So we just have to allow him to have chosen what he wanted. Now, I don't agree with that being what he was choosing with that possibility. He was just trying to take a trip, a fateful trip, if that. Southerner set out with another man to trap along with the Porcupine River north of the Arctic Circle in fall of 1976. His friend suggested they work together on the same side of the river, but Steve Southern told the Post-Standard that his brother had other ideas. Now, the friend's named Stan, and they don't know any other information about him. It says the family, at least, and I don't know any. So anyway, he was very independent and loved the outdoors, and he liked to do things the way he wanted to do things. Steve told the publication instead the friends agreed to trap on opposite sides of the river, then meet up in the spring to catch a plane out. Now, the guy, Stan, got sick early and took off early, and he just assumed that the dude would figure it out and leave on his own. But when the time to return home arrived, Gary never showed up, KTUU reported. His family hired a friend to search for him, but the man found only his camp with some of his supplies. I wonder what his camp looked like. Was it a tent? Was it a shack? Was it a shed? Maybe the shed is just a gravestone, if you will. In time, his family erected a gravestone listing Gary's date of death as 1977 with an inscription reading "Lost in Alaska," the station said. So if you didn't realize, Bob Ross was in that area, right? A mysterious skull in July 1997, 20 years after Gary Southern went missing. A hunter found a skull along the Porcupine River about 8 miles from the Canadian border, Alaska troopers reported in a news release. Now, don't worry, this story gets very, very compelling real quick. So troopers searched the area but could not find any other remains, the release said. The skull, which had markings suggesting a bear attack, was stored at the Alaska State Medical Examiner's office with other unidentified remains for years. In 2022, cold case investigators extracted DNA from the skull, the release said. Now, there's a rumor out there that he's in jail, that he was in jail, and that he was doing his show from prison, but nobody would know because they had it set up for whatever reasons, right? I don't know if that's true or not, but, well, let me just keep reading here. So, they contacted Steve Southern, who agreed to provide a DNA. The reason I was bringing that up was because his paintings, they're not for sale. They're locked up. I think they're locked up in the possession of the state. It belongs to the state, maybe. I don't know. DNA matching confirmed the skull belonged to Gary, troopers said. Steve told the Post-Standard that he later learned the skull had bear tooth marks and that Gary probably died shortly after beginning his trip in fall of 1976. Back to the other point, my wife was telling me that you're not allowed to make money in jail like that or something to that effect, and so they kept him to keep in line with their policy. I don't know, but it was much more brutal than I had hoped. He told the publication, "You always have hope, but we now know what happened to him." The remains are being returned to the family, which is planning a memorial service for later this year. So don't worry, lots of interesting information. So let's see what's here that we wanted to show you. Right there, yeah. Once authorities matched the skull, which was scarred with bear claw markings, right? Not bear teeth markings, so claw markings. So what's with the discrepancy? And then there's also other discrepancies, like they're saying that he was just on a hike, and then others say he was on a hunting trip. Well, he was trapping, not hunting. And then others say, well, they were just walking on opposite sides of the river because they needed to meet up, and they were trying to find a spot that was frozen over. Like all kinds of elaborate different stories, and I don't know how that happened. I suppose that just happens after 46 years of people retelling the story and whatnot. I'm sure I'm messing this whole guy's history up, anyway. So if you want to learn more about this guy and his mysterious death, Eaten Alive's on YouTube, the Alaskan Bear Mauling Mystery. I checked it out. It wasn't too informative, but it does give you some info into the mystery about this guy, and there is some mystery that they think that he might have been murdered. Troopers theorize link in 3 baffling area murders. Now, I want you to really pull out your notes and pay attention this time. So Thomas Bundy was a serial killer suspect in Fairbanks, also known as the North Pole Killer. I don't believe that he is the actual killer. He denied doing anything, and then there's some supposed statements made privately to the police, which you know how that always goes. Was he set up? Was it a patsy? And then again, you don't even know who serves time, really. I mean, they could just put up a person and say that this is this person, he's a serial killer, all these cases are solved, and in reality it's just a CIA agent that they dressed up as the perp, and then they never jailed him, of course, but they just tell the public, yeah, he's in jail. So this right here is a photo, not really a good one, of the motorcycle crash and his helmet there, and these are the 5 girls that he supposedly killed, who I think Bob Ross actually killed. And for whatever reasons, I think Bob Ross might have been MK Ultra, if you're asking me, to be honest. It just, the way he talks, the monotone, might be more than just his character or his nature. It could be like a lobotomy or something, or damage from all the drug use from the LSD or whatever. So, again, I don't know if any of this is true. This is all just me theorizing and spitballing off of theories that are already out there, and these could all be fake, right? These could all, not fake, but these could all be wrong. So, but if you want to read the article that I found about Bundy, which I find very curious that, Bundy, I mean, is this like version 1.0 of the other Bundy, right? But the more intriguing part and the more compelling part that I'm about to show you is going to hopefully make your jaw drop a little bit. Now, what if I told you the FBI was looking for a serial killer that worked at the Air Force Base during 1979 to 1981? Well, they were, because that's where this guy worked. All these victims were going to go over their story, and they claim that they saw a person in an Air Force Base outfit in a car talking to one of the ladies. So let's read and see what we can. So Thomas Richard Bundy was an American serial killer who from 1979 to 1981 committed a series of murders of young women and girls in the city of Fairbanks, Alaska. At the time of the killings, Bundy was serving at the Ilsen Air Force Base near Fairbanks and for a long time avoided suspicion. Now notice, 1981 is the end of his crime spree, and Bob Ross left the Air Force Base in 1981. I'm assuming he knew the gig was up, and so he got the heck out of town. Now, more surprising is that they thought that and died before apprehension. Of course, the story behind his apprehension is weird. They caught him, then let him go for 8 days, and then they found his body, smashed up, whatever. But it's, I don't know. I don't believe that this is the serial killer that we're thinking of, with the dates being so coincidental, and then them 2 years or whatever. Because you got to remember, like, when he dies, his will comes out. Maybe he admits some things, and they're able to release some things privately, but they have to do it carefully. So they act like a hunter found the skull, right? So anyway, Thomas Richard Bundy was an American serial killer who from 1979 to 1981 committed a series of murders of young women and girls in the city of Fairbanks, Alaska. At the time of the killings, Bundy was serving at the Ilsen Air Force Base near Fairbanks and for a long time avoided suspicion. Despite confessing to the crimes privately, mind you, to the police, Bundy was not immediately arrested due to a legal mistake and remained at liberty for another 8 days, during which, for unknown reasons, he did not make any effort to evade justice. Now, they also thought it was him because I guess a week prior he had tied up 2 girls, 2 hookers, I guess, ladies, young ladies, and tied them to the tree because he wanted to teach them a lesson. He was in his cop outfit. Don't know if that's true, but that's what the story goes. After his death, of course, he's not able to defend himself. So the murder series began on August 29, 1979, when Fairbanks resident Glenda Soderman, 19, went missing. Her decomposed body was found 2 months later in a gravel pit near Highway 23 miles south of Fairbanks. On June 13th, 1980, 11-year-old Doris Oring went missing. The brother of the deceased told police that a few days before his sister disappeared, he saw her talking to a stranger sitting in a blue car and wearing an Air Force uniform. The brother then helped the investigator make a complete identikit of the criminal. I wish I could see that, but anyway, on January 31st, 1981, 20-year-old Marlene Peters went missing, who on the day of her disappearance gathered to hitchhike from Fairbanks to Anchorage. 5 weeks later, Wendy Wilson, 16, disappeared on her way to the Opes to see her boyfriend, who was staying there. Miss Ope had offered Wendy a ride before she had disappeared. On May 16, 1981, 18-year-old Lori King disappeared, and shortly before her disappearance, Marlene Peters' partially decomposed body was found in October 1981. Not far from Wilson's body, the decomposed body of King was found near the Ilsen Air Force Base. During the investigation, the police for the first time suggested that a serial killer from among the military personnel was operating in the territory. So that right there should make everybody's ears perk up. There's a rumor that Bob Ross is a serial killer, and in fact, they were suspecting there was a serial killer operating in the same secluded or isolated Air Force Base area as he was for 20 years. If that isn't a red flag, along with all the other red flags, I don't know what else is. So let me continue reading. During the investigation, the police inspected all personnel of the Ilsen, I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name, by the way, Ilsen Air Base, including the employees employed as civilian specialists. By February 3rd, 1982, only 3 people were included in the suspect list, who at various times were distinguished by their destructive behavior towards women, one of them being Bundy. By that time, he had been transferred to Wichita Falls, Texas, where he had served since September 1981. So if they're walking around the base asking all these questions, Ross heard this, takes off, right? I mean, makes sense to me. Thomas Bundy was arrested on March 7, 1983, and was taken to the police station to be interrogated. In addition to an interrogation, a search was conducted in his house and the trunk of his car. During the search, evidence was found linking Bundy with the murders in Fairbanks. Upon learning of this, Thomas on the same day admitted to killing 5 women and girls and described in detail the murders and the circumstances in which they occurred, which I don't believe, because they would have arrested him then. He was also questioned about the murder of Cassandra Goodwin on March 22nd, but vehemently refused to admit to her murder. Why? Bundy indicated psychological problems and sexual complexes as a motive for committing the murders. Despite his confession, he was not arrested and had to be released because there was no warrant for his arrest. I mean, that makes no sense to me, but okay. Let's let him go for a couple of days and then let's just find him dead, right? That makes no sense. Sounds like he was set up. He was the patsy to take the blame for these deaths. So, or I'm just a delusional theorist, but I'm not delusional because I don't believe anything to be true except for God. So again, all this is theoretical. Alaskan authorities issued an arrest warrant for Thomas Bundy on March 15, 1983, but he was not immediately arrested in Texas, riding his motorcycle about 40 miles outside Wichita Falls, sorry about that, Texas. Bundy rode into the oncoming lane of the highway and collided with a truck. He died almost instantly. The incident was subsequently recognized as a suicide, which was retarded because an hour before that, he had filed his tax return. Why do you care about filing taxes if you're just going to commit suicide? I guess maybe it's possible he decided to commit suicide after filing his taxes. He said, you know what? I'm out of here. The gig is up. I'm out of here. They already got me. They're questioning me. Who knows? He might be the killer. But to me, it just seems so convenient as I'm going through this investigation and I find, this evidence that a serial killer was indeed operating in that area, and that, 1981, Bob Ross leaves. 1981, the murders stop. And in 1980, whatever, they're questioning all these people in early 1981. So it kind of leads me to believe that Bob Ross got scared and took off, right? Or maybe they caught him and they told him, you know what, we can use you. Let's join the CIA. And that's when he began his career. Very coincidental. The city of the North Pole, Alaska, is 1,700 miles south of the geological North Pole. Their streets have holiday names and stores sell Christmas-themed items year-round. The town's biggest attraction, so we don't care about all this stuff. Let's see here. So yeah, 5 females were murdered in the small community from 1979 to 1981. And I believe that this serial killer was operating well before that and even after that. But in 1981, he was out of that state. But before 1979, maybe he was just gearing up. And he was building up one a year, and it finally ended up to being, he couldn't control his impulses, which is kind of crazy to think about Bob Ross not being able to control his impulses. The man is like the poster child of calmness, right? So let's read a little bit more about these poor victims. Glenda Sodeman, 19, vanished from her home in North Pole on August 29th, 1979. Glenda was a newlywed and the daughter of an Alaska state trooper. That is weird. Glenda and her husband had a small baby, and when her husband arrived home on August 29th, the baby was in the crib, but Glenda was gone. By all accounts, Glenda was happy and had no reason to run away from her home. The following October, Glenda's decomposed body was found in a gravel pit near Moose Creek on the Richardson Highway, not far from Ilsen Air Force Base. Glenda had been shot in the face, and troopers found a .38 caliber pistol cartridge near her body. Mind you, not a shotgun shell. So the medical examiner discovered no evidence suggesting Glenda had been sexually assaulted. Suspicion fell on Glenda's new husband, who failed a lie detector test. Even Glenda's father suspected his son-in-law of the crime, but troopers found no evidence to arrest the husband. So it seems like they're just kind of tacking on this weird murder to this guy. So Doris Oring, 11. On June 11, 1980, 11-year-old Doris Oring and her older brother were riding bikes together on the roads in North Pole. Doris cycled ahead of her brother, and when her brother caught up with her, he saw his sister talking to a strange man in a blue car. The man had propped open the hood of the car as if he was having engine problems. When Doris's brother pulled up, the man quickly shut the hood, jumped in the car, and sped away. The brother was later able to describe the man to a police sketch artist. He told police he thought the man's blue shirt looked like an Air Force uniform, and the man had a military-style haircut. Well, that's a little weird. I guess Bob Ross grew his hair out, right? So he permed it to save money. I don't know when. But that doesn't really fit, right? So 2 days later, Doris disappeared and her bicycle was found hidden in the bushes along Badger Road near her home in North Pole. A witness reported seeing a small blue car tear around the corner at an intersection near Badger Road. The driver seemed preoccupied and was wrestling with something or someone in the seat next to him. Police believe the attacker hid in the bushes on the side of the road and waited for Doris to ride her bike past his hiding spot. Once she got close, he jumped out of the brush, grabbed her off her bike, and tossed the bike into the ditch. State troopers asked security at Elson Air Force Base for a list of blue cars registered to drive on the base. Now, what I find curious is that they don't ever tell us any of these lists, like the 3 that were suspected along with the actual accused. The Air Force handed the troopers a list of 550 names of people who owned vehicles possibly matching the description of the car. Investigators were desperate to find Doris, but with no fingerprints or other forensic evidence, they didn't know where to begin. Since troopers had not cleared Glinda, Soderman's husband, for Glinda's murder, they decided to question him about the abduction of Doris Oring. They gave him another polygraph test, and this time the polygrapher found the test result inconclusive. They had no physical evidence pointing to Soderman, but he could not pass a lie detector test when questioned about the murder of his wife or the abduction of the young girl. Troopers decided to bring in a polygraph expert to question Soderman. After 10 minutes, the expert left the examining room and told troopers that Soderman had an irregular heartbeat and he could never pass a polygraph test. The test results from an individual with a heartbeat like Soderman's would always be classified as inconclusive or failing. Since the troopers had no reason other than his lie detector test results to suspect Soderman, they dismissed him as a suspect in the disappearance of Doris. Why did they have to dismiss him as a suspect? They said it could have kept him there. I mean, it's not illegal to suspect somebody, even for the police, right? That's weird. So Marlene Peters, 20 years old. On January 31st, a little over 7 months after someone snatched Doris Oring, 20-year-old Marlene Peters disappeared. Marlene was last seen trying to hitch a ride from Fairbanks to Anchorage to visit her father, who was sick with cancer. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, man. Police considered Marlene's disappearance suspicious, but they had no way to know if someone had abducted Marlene near Fairbanks or if she had disappeared somewhere else between Fairbanks and Anchorage. Troopers did not immediately link her case to Doris Oring's or Glinda Soderman's. Wendy Wilson, 16. 5 months after Marlene disappeared, 16-year-old Wendy Wilson vanished. Wendy was last seen hitchhiking, and a witness saw her climb into a white pickup truck in Moose Creek near Fairbanks. 3 days after she disappeared, Wendy Wilson's body was found near Johnson Road, 32 miles south of Fairbanks near the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Wendy's killer had strangled her and then fired a shotgun into her face. 9 weeks after the discovery of Wendy Wilson's body, Marlene Peters' remains were found. Marlene also had been dumped near Johnson Road, and she was found only 2 miles from where Wendy had been dumped. And another thing I know, wait till you find out what the guy that they're accusing of, the North Pole killer, what he was able to do here in a minute with satellites, I guess. So 3 days after she disappeared, Wendy Wilson's body was found near Johnson Road, 32 miles south of Fairbanks near the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Wendy's killer had strangled her and then fired a shotgun into her face. Talk about a not so happy little accident. 9 weeks after the discovery of Wendy Wilson's body, Marlene Peters' remains were found. Marlene also had been dumped near Johnson Road, and she was found only 2 miles from where Wendy had been dumped. Marlene also had been strangled and then shot in the face with a shotgun. So different weapons being used. If you recall earlier, I said no shotgun shells, though. That's why. Lori King, 19. 2 days after police recovered Marlene Peters' body, they were notified of the disappearance of 19-year-old Lori King. Lori had last been seen walking in Fairbanks. The Fairbanks police and the Alaska State Troopers now knew they had a serial killer operating in and near North Pole outside of Fairbanks. Soon the news media labeled the string of murders the Fairbanks serial murders. Police, as well as civilian and military volunteers, searched for Doris Oring's and Lori King's body near the Johnson Road area where the remains of Wendy Wilson and Marlene Peters had been discovered, but they found no sign of either victim. On September 2nd, 1981, 4 airmen on a hunting trip came across the remains of Lori King in a wooded area near a missile site off Johnson Road. Earlier searches had somehow missed the area, right? I mean, come on. The killer had done nothing to hide Lori's body like Wendy and Marlene. Lori had been strangled and then shot in the face with a shotgun. I mean, that sounds very systematic. It makes me wonder, in this time and era, it's like, I mean, Jesus, the stuff that these Satanists or the Illuminated could get away with is amazing, I bet. So because Lori's body was found on a federal reservation, the FBI joined the case and a task force was formed. Investigators now knew they were hunting a dangerous predator, possibly named Bob Ross. Now, while we have this second, guys, please be sure to subscribe, like, share. This video is almost over here, but I do put a lot of effort into these videos and research and all that. So if you want to donate to my channel, I have a Cash App link. It's basically a cash symbol and cartel member. Now, I'm really hurting for funds. The channel is really hurting for funds, and these videos don't come out as quickly and with that much effort anymore, because basically it takes a lot of time to do this, and if I can't make money doing this, my wife gives me a really bad time if I'm just doing this for a hobby, let's just say. So help me out, make me a professional, and donate if you can. So let's continue reading. Because Lori's body was found on a federal reservation, the FBI joined the case and a task force was formed. Investigators now knew they were hunting a dangerous predator. Some, but not all, of the women showed signs of being raped before they were murdered. An investigator from the Elson AFB Office of Special Investigations reported he had identified 3 individuals on the base who acted inappropriately toward women. One of the 3 men he identified was Technical Sergeant Thomas Richard Bunday, a 33-year-old electrical expert. Co-workers said Bunday repeatedly showed disrespect toward women, and one woman who worked with Bunday said he was verbally abusive and she was afraid of him. Now, I want to know who the other 2 were. I'm sure their names out there. If you could find them for me, I'd be very much interested in that. It is important to note that profiles are theories and not solid evidence. I couldn't have said it better myself. After Lori King was murdered on May 16, 1981, the murders ended. In September of 1981, hunters discovered the body of Lori King. It was another body near Johnson Road. By November 1982, the task force concluded the murderer was either dead, in prison, or had moved somewhere else, like Bob Ross. The task force decided they needed to look at military personnel who had transferred outside the state in the past 18 months. Wow, so they definitely looked at Bob Ross. Wow. Who was on that list? Thomas Richard Bunday. Bunday had transferred to Shepherd Air Force Base near Wichita Falls, Texas on September 9, 1981. They contacted police agencies near other U.S. Air Force bases around the world and asked them to be on the lookout for any murders similar to the ones perpetrated near Fairbanks. Now, he became a traveling salesman, and we're going to try to hunt down who he was hunting down as a traveling salesman. Wichita Falls police reported investigating a murder similar to the ones that had occurred near Fairbanks, but when Alaska investigators arrived in Texas to discuss the murder, they found a sheriff sitting at his desk watching television and reading a newspaper who told them there are no unsolved crimes in my county. The sheriff said Lori had been killed by a drug dealer but was now dead. What? Doris Oringer's younger brother identified a photo of Bunday in a lineup, and he had no trouble picking out a photo of Bunday's car as a vehicle he had seen by his sister 2 days before her abduction. Troopers interviewed Bunday's Alaskan neighbors and co-workers, and most painted an unflattering picture of Bunday. They described him as an unlikable loner. Bunday had a variety of shotguns and pistols registered to his name. In January 1983, Trooper Sam Barnard flew to Shepherd Air Force Base and interviewed Richard Bunday. Bunday agreed to answer Barnard's questions, but refused to take a lie detector test, allow a search of his home, or give samples of his hair. When Bernard told Bunday that Doris Oringer's brother had identified a photo of Bunday as the man he had seen talking to his sister, Bunday didn't respond. Still, they didn't feel they had enough evidence to arrest him. Alaska investigators had no authority to arrest someone in Texas, and the Texas police needed a warrant to arrest someone for crimes committed in Alaska. Richard Bunday agreed to come in and talk to investigators as requested without an attorney. Well, that's surprising, right? But he's saying it's not surprising. This is not surprising to me, as psychopaths have extreme narcissism and feel they can outsmart investigators. So, another thing I know is Bob Ross was pretty clear to say he didn't like to yell. That's why he left. So maybe he had to change his demeanor so he wouldn't be, since that's what they were looking for. So anyway, Richard Bunday agreed to come in and talk to investigators as requested without an attorney. This is not surprising. Let's see here. After several days of speaking to him for 3 hours at a time, Richard Bunday gave his only denial. I really enjoyed talking to you guys, but you say I did these things and I didn't. There you go. Case closed, right? For me at least. In a search of his home in Texas, they found an article on the murders from a newspaper in Fairbanks, Alaska. Later, during a phone call, finally, Richard admitted that the bodies found weren't all of them. Bunday returned the next day to talk to the officers. They shared that the family of 11-year-old Doris Oringer was upset that they didn't have her body. Richard started crying and stated he didn't know why he did it. He admitted that he had strangled her and drove in his trunk onto the Air Force base in which he worked. Well, that doesn't make sense either. This is really weird. So in 1986, 3 years after Bunday's death and a few months after Doris Oring should have graduated from high school, Doris's skull was found in a remote section of Eielson Air Force Base. Now check this out, what Richard Bunday's job allowed him to set up. high-powered cameras so he could watch places from the military base where he committed the crimes, so he could observe investigators as they worked the crimes. Richard Bunday's job allowed him to set up high-powered cameras so he could watch places from the military base where he committed the crimes, so he could observe investigators as they worked the crimes. Investigators believe Bunday committed the 5 murders in Alaska and the one in Texas. They believed he denied the murder in Texas because Texas had the death penalty and Texas police couldn't arrest him until a significant amount of paperwork went through if he was only charged with crimes in Alaska. Okay, so too much paperwork to process a murderer. Okay. The Alaska troopers had a problem. They had no power to arrest him outside of Alaska. All flights headed from Texas to Alaska have a layover in Seattle. If Bunday decided to go to Alaska, he could freely walk. Hearing of the dilemma, the Texas governor gave them access to a private jet that would make a direct flight to Alaska on March 16th. Very weird. So the governor private jetted them in and then he died. March 16, 1983 was dark and eerie. There were tornado watches throughout Texas. Bunday had slipped by the security guards and escaped surveillance. Right. That makes sense. After first dropping off his taxes at H&R Block. That makes sense. Bunday took the Sons of Anarchy ending. I guess he didn't want to get hit with a collection bill or audit up in heaven, right? So very, very weird stuff. I'm not sure why they would include that unless they're just trying to show the people that are wise enough to read between the lines that isn't normal. So after first dropping off his taxes at H&R Block, Bunday took the Sons of Anarchy ending, which means he drove over 100 miles an hour on his motorcycle straight into the front of an oncoming semi-truck. The truck driver stated he tried to avoid him. Bunday kept coming at him, and that was the end of Richard Bunday. Now, that bike doesn't look like it got hit going 100 miles against a semi. That wheel, I mean, that wheel would be, there'd be nothing left of this damn thing, dude. And the helmet intact, very weird stuff. And then, I don't know, maybe it's possible, I guess. Anything's possible, right? But to me, that's the story of Bob Ross and, you know, the theories I have. So thank you, theorists. And with that said, I'm going to bow out with my typical. And as always, to God be the glory.